Hey, everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up War Chant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central, and Township in the heart of College Town. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Thursday morning, August 24th, to you and yours. You're almost through this week, last week without Florida State football anyway. There is some college football this weekend. We'll get to that tomorrow, but we're almost there, ladies and gentlemen. Hold on. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. It's another good one for you today. Another great guest lined up, Mr. Tom Lang, of course, of the Jeff Cameron Show, all around 97.9 ESPN Radio, friend of the program, going to join us today. Talked to him last night while we were actually filming a little something for War Chant, so you're going to want to keep your eye on that coming up in the next week or so. But first of all, thanks so much for waking up with us here at 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio or streaming over the TuneIn Radio app and the WTSM app, which is, of course, our own creation. It's a great place to find our show and all the other shows here on the Sports Monster. Our podcast, iTunes, Podcast Republic, warchantradio.com, YouTube. You probably have a place by now. And if you do, we thank you so much for doing that. If you like the show, give us a good review. Give us a 5-star rating. Subscribe to the show. It helps us. And subscribing, of course, helps you. radio@warchant.com. There's your email address to send your comments, your questions, your concerns, especially questions for the mailbag. We're going to be doing one on tomorrow's show. It looks like Gene Williams is going to join us again for round 2, just because we had a couple questions last week that were specifically for Gene that we just didn't get a chance to get to. So we're going to tackle that, plus a couple new questions, all coming up tomorrow. So if you like Q&A, tomorrow's the show for you to listen to. At Wake Up War Chant, also the Twitter account where you can get in touch with us, your comments, your questions, your concerns, and of course, our mailbag goes right there as well. Finally, warchant.com. Now's as good a time as ever to be a premium member. If you like football, especially Florida State football, I don't know if you know this, but there's kind of a game in a week. And if you want to know all the up-to-date, all the inside scoop, everything that we've got for you, every little update on Matthew Thomas, every little update on that offensive line, every little update on injuries, you're going to be up-to-date always with warchant.com. So if you want a free trial, warchant30 is the promo code you need to put in at checkout. That gives you 30 free days of unlimited access to our premium content at warchant.com. And finally, you know we can't do this show without our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central, Township, all right there in the heart of College Town. If you're not making it up to Atlanta, that's going to be the place to be, ladies and gentlemen. So make sure you are headed there. If you can't make it, if you're in Tallahassee, that's the place to go. And heck, even when it's not a football, it could be a random baseball Tuesday after a game at Hauser in March, and Madso's still the place to go. It's always there, right in the heart of College Town. You know where to find it, right there on Madison Street, Central Township. Head on over to Happy Hour tonight. Got some good news. We found out that we're in the works right now. We don't have all the details yet, but we're going to be doing ourselves a little pregame show. We're going to record it on Friday night in Atlanta at the Atlanta Seminole Club party. So make sure you're out there. Come say hi to the War Chant crew and just have yourself a good time, because we're going to record that. It's looking like a little bit earlier. Then, of course, we're going to have a great time into the night. Not too great, because, listen, I get it's an 8 o'clock kickoff, but not to steal something from our friend Jeff Cameron, but you got to maintain just a little bit, folks. You got to keep your head on your shoulders, because it's Florida State, Alabama. And this is one that, I will say this, you're going to want to remember if you are someone who maybe goes a little bit to excess and can lose some things out of your memory if you put certain things into your body. Don't do that, because I promise you, no matter what happens that Saturday, you're going to want to remember that atmosphere, that game, what it's like to be at the biggest opening game of all time. Not just as a Florida State fan, not just as an Alabama fan, if by chance you're listening, but as someone who is in love with the game that we all love. College football at its absolute finest, with two of its finest programs going at it. And I hate to wax poetic, and I think you'll hear a similar sentiment from Tom Lang in the next segment. At this point, you're just ready for this game to get here. And you're ready to know what the consequences of this game are going to be, whether they be good or bad. And it got me to wondering, earlier on in the day when I was prepping for the show yesterday. It made me think, would this be, outside of a national championship, one of the most important wins, if not the most important win, again, outside of a national title, in program history? And I know what you're saying, and I know exactly what's going to happen, because there are a ton of monumental wins in Florida State history that are not national title games. I go immediately toward Dunn. That's a huge one in the fabric of Florida State, because that national championship never happens without that. You go to some of the great games that have been played over the years in bowl games, some of the great upsets that happened in Nebraska in the Sea of Red, some of the great upsets that have happened all throughout Florida State history. There's a whole cemetery full of them, literally, that you can go up and you can pick one. But I think for college football and for this season and for Florida State, this win goes without saying. It's arguably Jimbo Fisher's biggest win outside of a national title victory in 2013. Nobody's ever beaten Nick Saban if they've ever been from the Saban tree. Nobody has ever beaten them in a season opener. An ACC team outside of Alabama has not beaten Nick Saban in the Nick Saban era, except for his first season, which, oh yeah, by the way, that was the Florida State Seminoles who beat that team back in 2007. So I think it's worth debating. Is it safe to say that the Alabama game maybe means more for the program and the Clemson game maybe means more for the season? Because no matter what happens on Saturday, no matter if you win, if you lose, if it's a blowout, if it's a close game, whatever the circumstances that inhabit that Alabama game are, if you win, it's great. You're going to get all the respect in the world. You're going to be the number one team in the country. And quite honestly, you're going to earn yourself a mulligan. You're going to earn yourself a, hey, I stubbed my toe in this game, or hey, maybe it just wasn't our night later on in the year. And obviously it's ideal that that doesn't happen. But you've earned yourself a, well, that's fine. But Clemson, you don't really get mulligans inside the division, especially a division that has the reigning national champion on one side and the reigning Heisman Trophy winner on the other. This is as tough as it gets. And so I think it's weird when you have that argument. This is one of the few times that I feel like you can really have your cake and eat it too. That a win over Alabama, I think, signals to a certain extent that God can bleed to a certain extent, because Alabama has been so untouchable, especially in these games, in these neutral sites. But if they lose back-to-back teams and they lose them to the cream of the crop in the quote-unquote rival conference in the ACC, it's the only conferences in sports that overlap with each other. The ACC and the SEC share a very similar footprint. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know there. But the Clemson game, that game up there, even if Clemson's got a loss or two and they're out of conference at that point, it's a tiebreaker for a certain extent. If Clemson ends up beating Louisville and you end up beating Louisville and neither of you stub your toe along the way, it's the division. And quite frankly, if you have lost to Alabama, it's your shot at the national title on the line. It's that big of a deal. And that's not me trying to put a damper in this Alabama game. It's just, I think it's just worth noting that you look at both of these games and you can make an argument for either. You can say what this means for the program, or what a great season or a playoff season would mean for the program. You kind of have to weigh them both, because you don't have to have a victory over Alabama to make the college football playoffs and win the national championship. You might have to if you end up rematching them. But I feel like you need that win over Clemson to get into the conference championship, to get into the playoff, and then, of course, compete for a national title. So I'm curious to kind of balance those two out. I'm curious to see, as the season shakes out especially, what that Clemson game becomes. But it goes without saying that this Alabama game is for real. It's legit. It's the greatest opener of all time, baby. And I know, just like you, and just like me, we're all ready to see how this shakes out. But first of all, we got to get you caught up in the world of sports. Lots of stuff going on in Major League Baseball last night, including an absolute heartbreaker in Pittsburgh. Let's get you caught up. This is While You're Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning. Wake up. Wake up. Wake me up.
Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
As I mentioned, we're going to start in Pittsburgh, where the Pirates are victorious over the Los Angeles Dodgers 1-0. Rich Hill threw 98 pitches through 9 innings. My goodness. Excuse me. That's through 10 innings. He ends up throwing 99 for the whole game. He has a perfect game going on into the 9th. A perfect game. And an error ends up ruining that. After that, it's a tie game. The Dodgers had 8 hits throughout 9 innings. Couldn't manufacture a single run. The 10th inning, a walk-off home run, spoils Rich Hill's perfect game. Imagine if you're a pitcher and you lost a perfect game when your team had 8 hits, didn't manufacture a single run. You lost a perfect game because of an error that was not your fault in the 9th inning. And then losing now. A no-hitter the inning later, and then losing the game in that same inning. Absolutely incredible. Elsewhere, it's the Baltimore Orioles over the Oakland A's 8-7 in 12 innings. The San Francisco Giants defeat the Milwaukee Brewers 4-2. Phillies all over the Marlins last night in Philadelphia 8-0. Toronto goes down to Tropicana Field and gets a win over the Rays 7-5. The Cubbies beat the Reds 9-3 in Cincinnati. The Metropolitans get a win over the Diamondbacks at home 4-2. Red Sox over the Cleveland Indians in Cleveland 6-1. Yankees all over the Tigers again. My goodness, we've become their slump busters. It's 10-2. The guys in pinstripes over the Motor City Kitties 9-5. That's the 9-6. That's the Seattle Mariners over the Atlanta Braves. Atlanta had that game on the ropes, and their bullpen kind of let it slip away there in the end. The Astros over the Nationals 6-1 in Houston. The White Sox, over the Minnesota Twins 4-3 in Chicago. St. Louis Cardinals defeat the San Diego Padres 6-2 in St. Louis. Kansas City, the Royals get a win over the Rockies 6-4. And finally, it's the Texas Rangers on the West Coast against the Angels, getting the win in L.A. 7-5 in 10 innings. When we come back, it's an extended conversation with Tom Lang on Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio. Welcome back to Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by your friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central Allen Township, all in the heart of College Town. Ryan Kelly alongside Mr. Tom Lang. Tom, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine on this fine Thursday. How are you?
I'm fine, man. It's good to talk with you. Of course, as you can probably just imagine from the microphone, we're recording this the night before. We're at a nondescript golf course on the south side of town in Tallahassee, and well, we may or may not be filming something you may see in the next week or so.
Yeah, promo shooting, you might call it, right?
Yeah. So you may want to watch the Man Cave show this Tuesday night. I believe new night.
That's correct.
Same time, 7:00.
Exactly right.
So make sure you're tuned in for that. You might see Mr. Lang. But Tom, I feel like it's been a while since I've been able to talk with you. Got to talk with Jeff at ACC Kickoff. I mean, we've talked off mic, but
sure.
On the air, we're a month into camp. You've just kind of reached that point where, especially as a fan, you just want football already. You're just ready to watch it. What you've read, what you've followed, what you've covered, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with you that we're at that point where we're talking in circles. Everything's hypothetical.
Uh-huh.
That's the hard part of right now is, how good's the offensive line going to be? Is Eberle going to be that much better with greater range of motion and strength in his hips, ability to bend? How's Derek Kelly going to be at left tackle? I mean, since we've talked.
That's the one that still is just the eyebrow raiser to me.
It was, Ball and Williams to Leonard and now to Kelly. So, obviously you're covering that day-to-day, and I'm covering that day-to-day. But since it's the first time we're talking, I mean, good Lord. I hope things turn out well there, but it raises your eyebrows. To me, though, from what I saw from the open practice, I mean, that's going to be the thing that carries me through into next week when we start covering the team. Injury reports come out, and we learn a little bit more about Alabama. But I really liked what I saw out of both the tailbacks. Jacques Patrick looks to be in primo shape this year, along with the freshmen who are already ready to take on, the brutal fall that is college football in the 12-game regular season. I love what I saw out of the receivers. Keith Gavin looks every bit the game breaker that he was recruited to be, blue chip.
And every little whisper you've heard says that he is.
Right, and sometimes Jimbo will hype guys up in his post-game pressers, or post-practice pressers, I should say. But from all accounts, I mean, it's not just hype. This guy is living up to the billing. I really loved what I saw out of Auden Tate in the open practice. He just looks polished. And in talking with him on Media Day, too, he seems like he's the one that's taken on the attitude of leadership in that segment. We were wondering which of the new guys was going to be the leader type. I think that's Auden Tate. So to go along with polished route running and size of his own, I mean, we all talk about Gavin's size, but Auden Tate's not small either. I like what I see out of the weapons. It's hard to know what the trenches are going to bring to the table on the offensive side of the football.
Well, it's almost you come to this understanding, and you, like you said, sometimes during fall camp you talk in circles. You just kind of come to that understanding that let's rewind back to 2014, that Miami week where Cam Irving gets moved to center.
Yeah.
Rod Johnson comes in. When you first hear about that move and you first think about it, it either reeks of two things. It either reeks of desperate or it either reeks of smart, or there's something here. There's something in the weeds that people are ready to go. And when you hear about Derek Kelly, when you know Everly's the guy, of course you have to do as much experience as possible because it's not like that ULM game is week 2. It is not week 1.
Right.
The Alabama Crimson Tide is week 1. And it's one of those things where you hear, Derek Kelly, really?
Yeah.
Alec Everly seems to be the guy, and they're not really giving any second thoughts to it, really. Of course, now they can't with Bavion Johnson out, but it's one of those things where it's like they're either onto something or they're scared for their lives. It doesn't seem like there's a middle ground here.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in a way, I wish that the Kelly announcement to left tackle, was something that would come down in the same time frame as the Cam Irving and Rod Johnson move. That was hours before kickoff. We learned about that back in 2014. And it was, they're really going to do this. So they're going to go on the road on a Saturday night and start a freshman against Miami for his first career start. We're really doing this?
In the first real hostile environment trip to Miami you've taken in over a decade.
Right, exactly right. Because they thought they had it that night, and for 3 quarters it looked that way. But shucks, they just came up short again, and I hate it for them. But, this year – if you said Leonard was the left tackle all the way up to game week and then Saturday night you said Kelly was and Leonard's moving to right, you at least don't have time to assimilate that information and think about what it means. But it's hard for me not to think about it in terms of desperation. It's probably not. I mean, but it's just when you get in hypothetical season, it's not just talking in circles with other people. You also talk yourself into a paralysis by overanalysis type deal. And I just want to see the games. I get that there is college football this weekend, but even still, as nice as that is, that we're going to be watching real games that count, it still feels like it's 3 weeks away, not 9-10 days away from kickoff.
This camp kind of feels like it's taken longer than the average Major League spring training.
Oh,
this has been such a long camp, and I will give the credit. If Coach Fisher isn't just speaking in platitudes,
right.
I will give that team the credit that they kind of seem to have overcome the dog days without really, I guess you could say, getting over anxious or getting complacent or getting, can we just play the game already? And I feel like you can take that 2 ways when it comes to Alabama. You can either, can we just hurry up and play them and play this huge game that everybody's going to be watching, there's going to be this great atmosphere, or we need as much time as we can get because we're going to play the number 1 team in the country. There's 2 ways that you could take it, and it seems from everything that we've heard and seen that the team's taken the latter.
Yeah, exactly. And again, covering a bowl game is easier than this one because this feels like a championship-type game. It feels like a playoff game. But at least when you have a bowl game or a playoff game, you got 12, 13 other football games of evidence with that same group of 85. With this one, I mean, Alabama lost a lot on defense. So, how tight are they going to be in mastering their principles, in taking care of the backside of a defensive play? Are they going to lose contain? I mean, those are the things that they're talking about. They're wondering about, all right, we always seem to replenish and reload right away, but we've never had a test like this test in week 1. So are we going to be ready to answer the bell in week 1? So it just gets hard. But the thing I love is that, by all accounts, if you just look at these 2 rosters, this is going to be a physical football game. There's a 100% chance it's going to be a really physical football game, and it's going to be marked by some incredible defensive play. And for an era, last 3, 4, 5 years here at Florida State, where we're playing our biggest games, we have to score into the mid and upper 30s to win a football game. I don't know. I think the exciting thing about this one is that maybe you only have to score 24, 27 points to walk out of Atlanta with a win.
This screams a 27-24 affair because that's literally – it's funny you literally mentioned that. That's the number that's been marching around in my mind. I don't know who it is, but whoever wins this game is winning a 27-24 type ball game.
Sure, and we've played some of our rivals in the last few years, low-scoring type games. I mean, with Florida, you only have to score 3-5 points a year, and you can win that ball game. Miami only had to score 21
and
last year.
That's just the basketball team.
Right, exactly. 21 points last year for Miami. But when you're playing the Clemsons or the Louisville at the height of their power, or Auburn for the title, or Oregon when we were in the Rose Bowl and we lost that game, you had to score bunches and bunches and bunches of points. And I think the cool thing about this schedule this season overall, not just the Alabama game, and this first game in particular is defense might win the day. It might be about field position, and it might be about something that we used to watch back in the 90s and early 2000s more than we've seen the last few years.
You talk about field position. That means special teams probably going to be at a premium this season for Florida State. Kind of your thoughts on Logan Tyler, Ricky Aguayo, and even the returner situation that got a lot more interesting in the past couple days.
That is interesting, that you're turning to superstars. And don't get me wrong, I'm well aware that Jimbo would always play some of his better players over his time here as head coach, offensive coordinator. He's not afraid to put out first-teamers, even in blocking roles or kicking coverage roles. So returning is no surprise. I'm nervous, though, about the kicking game. I really am. It's not just because that ESPN promo came out 10 days ago, whatever it was, where he says, I'll go for it on every fourth down. No, in watching the open practice, Logan Tyler is getting more air under his kicks, and I know you guys have seen a ton of special teams on the beat, but it just seems like it's not a 90-10 or an 80-20 proposition that he's always going to get off a good one. It seems closer to 50-50, and when you play teams like Alabama or you have limited possessions in a game like the Miami game, or maybe even if the NC State game is a little bit ugly, man, you got to have your ducks in a row. And I have to be able to rightfully expect that from 42 to 47 yards, we're going to make a field goal every time we line it up, or 90% of the time we're going to line it up. I just don't know that that's going to be the case, and that's one of the bigger concerns I have coming into the season.
It's funny. We were talking with Tony Sakalas, a Bama insider, last week, and he was talking about how, surprise, surprise, Alabama's kicker situation is a mess again.
Yeah.
And can you imagine this game if those defenses are as advertised and those offenses can't move the ball and neither team can make a field goal?
Well, I mean, think about it, right? Let's say that Hurts or Francois turns the ball over inside their own 35-yard line. You get a 3-and-out. It might actually be the ball's back in your hands with no points on the board, you know? I mean, that changes the course of the way you call a game. Even Jimbo alluded to it when I just said earlier with the clip, he'll go for on fourth downs. I hope he does that more in general anyway in that no man's land territory. But the coverage game hasn't been great either in years past. The return game hasn't been great. I mean, the Keith Gavin return was one of the highlights of the Michigan game. It's a return that never should have happened. I mean, I heard Jimbo said he did what he was supposed to do. I don't know, okay. You're supposed to pause for a couple of seconds, pregnant pause, and then run it out. But ever since the Kermit Whitfield kick, we haven't had consistency. The return in the national championship game, we haven't had consistency in that phase. Dare I say, when Charles Kelly moved from special teams coordinator to defensive coordinator and Jay Graham took the special teams job, we haven't seen consistency in just about any phase of our special teams. So with points at a premium and field position hidden yards at a premium, yeah, that's something I'm very interested to see how we do in the first month.
You mentioned the way you call a game like this, and I think that's interesting in that the teams that beat Alabama are teams that are smart with the football. They don't turn it over, obviously, because Bama will make you pay for that. But they're also not just sitting and they're not trying to play Alabama's game and just run it down your throat. They're often aggressive teams. It's the Ole Misses of the world who every once in a while pop Alabama.
Sure.
It's the Clemsons of the world who pop Alabama. It seems to be the teams that don't play into their hands and into their game are the ones who have the biggest shot of winning, which I think is partially why even today they've been so successful in the SEC is because the SEC has decided we all need to act exactly like Alabama. Well, that's great. Well, there's only one Alabama, and they're going to beat anybody who's trying to clone them. How aggressive do you think Jimbo Fisher is in this game?
I think that's the most fascinating question of the game from the offensive side of the ball. Because if we try to run, 90 plays in this game, that's not what we do. That's not what Florida State does. But if you try to test them with up-tempo and mix it up a little bit more, I don't think that's a bad idea either. Look, you roll out the football on the field, and you want to play it up-tempo, slow-tempo, pro-style, 5-wide, you name it. Alabama's likely going to win. It doesn't matter what way you want to play it. But you're right. What has given Alabama fits the most consistently since Nick Saban's been there, it's been the up-tempo type. I think the really crazy thing about this game is that both offenses should test both defenses with up-tempo play. What's been one of the biggest bugaboos for Florida State? Even
the Louisvilles and the Clemsons and
Ole
the
Miss,
Houstons.
Houston, Ole Miss, Auburn in the title game. You know what I mean? Like, even back to Pruitt. Everybody wants to say this is just a Charles Kelly issue, but when we face that offense out in Pasadena for the national title game, we didn't look like we had our ducks in a row. So, to me, if I'm Alabama, I look at that and I say, I have a quarterback that resembles something like those offenses have, which has not been the case for Alabama until the last year or two, where they've had more of a dual threat option. They've typically been under center and 3 yards in a cloud of dust. So they should test Florida State with the up-tempo. And in turn, I think with what DeAndre Francois brings to the table, Jimbo has to at least do that for some portion of the game. I think you have to probe your opponent's defense to see if they're prepared. So I think that's a fascinating question, and I'm very interested to see if there aren't any turnover disparities, 3-0 or anything like that. How many plays does Florida State run? How many plays does Alabama run?
Alabama, by all indications, is switching back to a more traditional, I guess you could say, smash-mouth Alabama offense. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that they'd completely gotten away with that, playing this West Coast style over the last couple of years with Lane Kiffin, and, of course, the albeit short Steve Sarkisian era.
Right, sure. But it was a continuation.
But yeah. I am interested to see if Alabama plays a more conservative offense that, run the ball, set up, play action, run the ball, set up, play action. I'm interested to see, and I'm interested to see it on both sides. Jalen Hurts is not the prototypical Alabama quarterback. He's not the, stiff as a board, no presence, here, take the ball, do what you got to do, right back. He's not that guy. DeAndre Francois is the first time I feel like you have a quarterback, maybe since Christian Ponder, who not only has natural legs, but is willing to use them. And I think that's a big qualifier there when you bring up, of course, the case of E.J. Manuel. I'm interested to see how much quarterbacks get loose in this game. I'm interested to see how much Jimbo calls things like that. He'd say, bootleg, hey, speed option. I want to see stuff like that. I want to see how aggressive Jimbo Fisher is and maybe having a quarterback that fits his more traditional offense better than just about anybody else.
Sure. First, quickly, to the Alabama point, I find that fascinating if they're going back to smash mouth. If you look at the tale of 2 seasons last year for Florida State, eliminate the Clemson game just for a moment in your mind, but we play a lot of up-tempo offenses. It's about passing attempts. It's about plays, total plays, the amount of plays you run.
It's North Carolina, Louisville, it's Ole Miss.
Right, struggle bus, right? And then you get to the back half of the season, it's pro-style offenses. And
Miami.
We thrive against pro-style
Florida.
offenses. Yeah, Michigan, right? So, to me, I think that's counterintuitive for Alabama. But to the Florida State point, the willingness to run. And, the funny thing was, I said this on the Cameron Show in the afternoons, but in watching those top 25 games of last year and seeing Florida State was on 5, 6 of them, whatever it was, I had forgotten, honestly. In the flow of the season, it didn't feel like it, but Jimbo called more design runs for the quarterback than I remembered, and he called more design runs for the quarterback in key situations, high-leverage situations.
Miami game is the perfect example here. When it's third down, everybody expects that ball going to Cook. He naked bootlegs it, and he gets the first down
Exactly.
easy.
He gets the win. And I'd do you one earlier in that game, too. Before the punt return that gets Miami, 10, 15 yards away, whatever it is, for the tying score, and Logan makes the tackle, Jimbo calls a beautiful designed quarterback run that our right tackle can't get out and make a block, or else it's a 15, 20-yard gain, and then we're playing the first down math game and the clock game the same way. And he did it in the Michigan game. He did it, obviously, in the Florida game. It's just he doesn't call it as much as other teams around the country do, but I forgot how much he did call it. With all of that said, he needs to call it more in the first month of the season. He needs to look at DeAndre in the eyes and say, my man, we've got 3 tough defenses we're facing in our first 4 games. You get a bit of a reprieve in October. Be ready. Both facets of your game, be ready.
If you had to pick it right now, gun to your head, Florida State or Alabama, I'd imagine you're probably like me. You think it's a close game, probably leaning towards the Alabama side. Now, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it just seems like everybody I've talked to has kind of been the same way.
Yeah, it's hard not to. It's hard not to pick against history and consistency. I mean, that second word obviously is a Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher word. I've been defending Florida State's cause in the afternoons a little hard. But that's not to say that I don't think
you've been sparring with Jeff, who thinks this could get ugly.
Thinks it could be 13, 17 points. And he qualified it and said that he thinks they may pull away late, which, okay, whatever. But at the same time, Alabama's the favorite for a reason. The one thing I would say, though, is I love the amount of experience coming back on this defense, Florida State's defense, versus Alabama's defense. And I think Florida State's the better of the 2 defenses in week 1. for that reason, experience. Alabama, by the end of the year, with all the athletes, I mean, they're going to be well into their system.
They're going to be Alabama.
They're going to be Alabama. But I think in this game, you might be able to catch Alabama off guard a little bit because they're asking a lot of players to be primetime players, not role players, against an offense that's as weapon-laden as Florida State's.
Do you think that's the key? The offense just can't blink?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's partially the key. You got to be so detail sound because I don't know that Florida State's going to try to run 90 plays like I said earlier. I think it's going to be 75, 85 plays in a perfect world. But with that comes no turnovers, all the hidden yards. Don't try to force it. But then at the same time, if Alabama gives you singles to Keith Gavin and they come up with a pick, well, you got to tip your cap. You got to go let your kids go make a play. And that's another thing I saw in the open practice that I loved out of what Francois was doing. The defense was bringing a lot of pressures. And he had little time to react, little time to get rid of the ball. And what he was doing, he saw Levante Taylor matched up on Keith Gavin. Mismatch. I'm throwing it over there. Just simplify the attack. Because if you think too much, Alabama's already beaten you.
Yep. And that's what they tend to do. That mystique, that aura, plus, of course, just the great coaching staff and the great schemes and one of the best minds to ever hold a headset in college football. Yep. You can't let that beat you. It's got to be matchups. It's got to be they bleed just like you. What the old Mickey quote? He's no machine.
Right, exactly.
It's got to be that. You've got to make God bleed.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what you've got to do in this game. And if you realize that you can do that, you can win.
Well, Florida State's got more than a puncher's chance.
Absolutely.
I hear that term, puncher's chance. It's like, man, that's for a guy who's got 1 in a million.
Yeah, this isn't Michigan and App State. This isn't this is heavyweights.
And if you want to, rest on something and feel positive about Florida State and the offensive line in particular, what offensive line went against better defensive lines top to bottom in the schedule last season? In the country. I mean, you look, even Ole Miss had a really good defensive line. We forget that, but that facet of Ole Miss's defense was stout. And then you add in South Florida and Miami and Clemson and Michigan and Florida. I mean, they've seen a lot of the best. So they should be prepared for this. In other words, at the end of September, if the offensive line's not good, they're not growing into good. They're just not good. But we'll certainly find out against Alabama and in the subsequent 2 games we have Doak with Miami and NC State.
Do we really have to wait another week and a half for this?
Yeah, frankly, we have to, and it sucks.
It really does. But it never sucks talking to you, my friend.
Hey, man, it was a pleasure.
Tom, always appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you, Ryan.
More on the other end. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online. How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in Warchant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on Warchant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
Welcome back to Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by your friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, all there in the heart of College Town. Hey, happy hour, 4 to 7 tonight. Hope to see you there. Good times over there in the shadow of Doak Campbell Stadium. It's the same thing, same experience. Well, should I say different experiences, but the same thing and the same great bargain there. Madison Social, Central and Township. 3 different places to wet your whistle at the best happy hour in Tallahassee. You know, we kicked off the show talking about which win, Alabama or Clemson, is more important to the season and which one's more important to the program. And I think you can make a valid case for either of them. And I think you could, well, I welcome your feedback on that one because I want to know your thoughts on it. So make sure to tweet us on that. Make sure to email us on that because I'd love to have that debate and that discussion a little bit more as we build more and more to this game. But it kind of got me thinking throughout the years. Jimbo Fisher, we love to rate wins, especially in that 2013 season, that 2014 season. But I don't feel like we've ever really taken Jimbo Fisher's work on a year-by-year basis and said this is the best work that was done in that particular season. So I ventured myself to make a list. I set it upon myself, and again, I think this will be another one that if you guys disagree, let's have some discussion on it. I'd love to have this conversation. The best Jimbo Fisher wins by year. Not by all time, not overall, because there's a lot of 2013 and 2014 wins to go around. But by year, what is Jimbo Fisher's best win throughout his 7 seasons as Florida State heading into his 8th? That's still weird to say, by the way. And I think 2010 has some decent candidates. That South Carolina game where you play without Christian Ponder, they play without Marcus Lattimore, and you have yourself a fun little time. It's maybe not the prettiest game in the world outside of the gym that Greg Reed had, but it was an important game because it's worth noting South Carolina won the East. And even though they'd been blown out by Auburn in the SEC title game, they were still considered one of the best teams in college football. People liked that team a lot. Florida State was an underdog. They won that game. Florida State, people forget, was a decently sized underdog against a Miami team that was considered to be further along to being quote-unquote back than them. Florida State ends up winning that game in convincing fashion, and Chris Thompson is still running to the end zone. But to me, the game that is the most important in that 2010 season, you don't have to look much further than that Florida game. That atmosphere was special. That time and that place was special, and it's one of those red-letter dates in the history of Florida State football that I don't think really gets enough credit, and that was the day that it officially fell apart for Florida. Urban Meyer leaves not too long after that. Florida State ends up getting a recruiting edge. People underestimate Jimbo Fisher as a first-year head coach. By the end of that season, Florida and Miami were looking for new coaches. Florida State got a year head start. Now, obviously, they got the best of those 3 guys. Will Muschamp doesn't work out at Florida. Al Golden doesn't work out at Miami. But don't underestimate the fact of Jimbo Fisher beating both of them in his first year. And Jimbo Fisher getting a year head start to establish himself as the new program, get everything up and running at FSU. Don't underestimate what that win said to recruits. Don't underestimate what it said to the blue chip talent of the state of Florida who had been going to Florida for the better part of 5 and 6 years. It's a big win in a big way, and it snaps a 6-game losing streak, one of the most miserable in the series history, to your most hated rival. 2011, it's simple to me. It's that Champ Sports /Citrus /whatever you want to call it now bowl against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Because if you don't win that game, you cap off what already didn't go down as a great season. Record-wise, it's the worst season Florida State's had under Jimbo Fisher. But if you don't come down from, what was it? I believe it was 14 down in that game. If you don't come back with a gutty performance from E.J. Manuel, who, of course, pretty much played with a broke leg for a majority of that game, that season caps off so miserably, and a lot of the goodwill and a lot of the hype that sustained that program going into the 2011 season, every last shred of it goes away. And a lot of it had already went away, especially after you go on that losing streak. You lose to Oklahoma, you lose to Clemson, you lose to Wake. It had already kind of gone away. But after that, you needed a big marquee win. Not over a Florida team that was terrible, not over a Miami team that, well, you really played a sloppy game against. Not that the officiating helped in that game, but the fact that you were able to get it done there is a big deal. Next year, 2012, I think, to me, in my mind, and this is one I had a tough time with, but I personally think it ends up being the ACC championship against Georgia Tech. You played horrible, uninspired football for most of that game, but you got it done and you won your conference title. And in listening to Jimbo Fisher talk around that time, it was so important to him and his program and the validation of what they were doing that they just win the ACC and they make it to a BCS Bowl. You beat that team. You came very close to not beating that team, and you end up in the Orange Bowl against NIU. I kind of wanted to go with Clemson here, but at the same time, Clemson had only won one game at Doak Campbell Stadium in the last 10 years, despite the ups and downs of that series. It was a great comeback win. It was a gutty win, but I think just the idea of getting back to the BCS, even though you didn't get your sexy game against a sexy Power 5 conference champion opponent, earning the right to get there, winning that conference and winning your division capping it off with that win against Georgia Tech, I think is important. Maybe not the sexiest win in that season, but the most important. 2013, it goes without saying, it's the BCS National Championship. You get punched in the mouth, you come back, everybody knows that game. 2014, you can kind of take your pick here, but 2014, I go to the Clemson game. This is the one that to me stands out because it shows Jimbo Fisher and how he had matured as a coach by that point in his 5th year on the job. I don't know how well 2010 Jimbo Fisher would have taken all the stuff that happened, and then, of course, the full game suspension coming down on Friday night of Jameis Winston. And obviously, Jimbo Fisher wasn't happy about it, and I don't think that's a very poorly kept secret that he was not thrilled about the timing of that and the place of that, nor should he have been. But the fact that that team was able to overcome that, thanks in part a little bit to Clemson. Shotgun on the goal line, the fumbling of the football, the fact that you didn't start Deshaun Watson and you decided to go to Cole Stout, you thank Clemson a little bit for it. But the fact that Florida State, early on in that season, because that was a very early in that season game, faced adversity, faced that big of a test, and you won it in overtime in a really gutty way, I think takes the cake in there. This is where it gets a little hard. 2015, because none of the wins in 2015 really were kind of wow wins or wow games. They won the games they were supposed to outside of Georgia Tech. They lost the games they were supposed to. But I think it's got to go to the Florida game. And the idea that you were able to, after 2012, when you blow that game, you kind of think, is Florida going to try to make this a series even despite their lack of offense? The fact that Jimbo Fisher's teams were able to win 3 straight in Gainesville, something that had surprisingly never been done in the history of Florida State sports, is impressive. And it's something that, to me, is worth celebrating maybe a little bit more than you have over the last couple of years. And I understand Florida's been down and is, let's face it, going through their own lost decade. The fact that you were able to do that, and you were able to do it as convincing as 27-2 was, it's remarkable. And it's something that, Florida's not going to stay bad forever. But the fact that you were able to dominate them in their house, and if you're a Florida State fan, of course, hopefully are able to do it again this season, it's something worth noting. And it's definitely something worth celebrating. I think sometimes even more than just the 27-2 and the 4-8 memes indicate. The fact that you've been able to keep that streak up is very, very impressive. And 2016, I give the nod to the Miami game. Once again, just because like in 2014, it kind of showed Jimbo Fisher as a coach, being able to handle those situations, being able to handle being dealt a strange hand. He handled that hand very, very well, and that was the game that he very well could have lost the locker room, he could have lost a streak, and he could have lost a ton of momentum that his program had. And the fact that Florida State was able to go out there, they were able to play inspired football, and they were able to beat a rival that they were not favored against in a very hostile crowd that for the second time that you went to their house smelled blood in the water and just knew this was the year and knew this was the time. You get big play out of your quarterback who gets hit mercilessly, comes back up, as Tom and I mentioned earlier, got the first down that ends up winning you the game, and DeMarcus Walker, of course, with the block. That is the most important win because, to me, if you don't win that game, you don't end up playing Michigan. You don't end up in a game against Clemson with stakes that, granted, you lost, but you played well against the eventual national champion. There was a lot of stuff to dissect there, but I think that's the one that gets the win. We're putting a ball on it right after this. It's Wake Up War Chant, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
32 teeth in a jawbone.
All right, folks, that's it. We are literally out of time, hard-pressed to say goodbye. But our thanks to Tom Lang and our thanks to you guys for listening. Mike and Mike is up next on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
WarChant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. WarChant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WarChant30. That's WarChant30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WarChant30. WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.
Hey, thanks for downloading today's show. If you haven't already, why don't you rate and subscribe us? We certainly do appreciate it, and of course, we appreciate you listening anyway, so just go ahead and click that right there. You know you want to. Come on. Come on. Thanks again for letting us do the show. We love giving you all the football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, all year round. Not just football season, not just spring practice, but hopefully giving you the freshest and newest FSU content every day. Thanks, guys.